You don't meet people by accident, especially the ones who trigger something ancient in you. There's a strange familiarity in their eyes, like you've known them long before you knew yourself. But that comfort, it doesn't come from love. It comes from a wound. And wounds know how to find each other in the dark. They don't walk into your life shouting. They slip in quietly, dressed in everything you've been missing. Their words sound like safety. Their presence feels like home. But beneath the surface, something unseen begins to shift. Something ancient inside you, something forgotten, starts to stir. And this is the first face of emotional predation. The familiar stranger. They reflect a need so deep inside you, you forget to question it. You don't see a predator. You see a healer. You don't feel a threat. You feel recognition. But Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What feels like fate may be your unhealed past playing dress up. The unconscious magnetism of wounds. Imagine this. You walk into a room. 10 strangers. Your conscious mind notices nothing unusual. But your unconscious? It scans like a radar. And without knowing why, you're drawn to that one person. The one whose voice seems to vibrate through your chest. The one who makes you nervous, excited, seen, all at once. But that magnetic pull is not random. It's psychic recognition. Your psyche, shaped by years of subtle programming, emotional deprivation, and unmet needs, recognizes in them something you once lost or never received. This is not love. This is resonance. They reflect a pattern, an emotional template buried in your shadow, in the part of you had to abandon to survive. The moment you feel instant connection, pause. Because predators don't pounce. They seduce. Not with aggression, but with understanding. Why you feel safe with the unsafe. It's not that the predator looks dangerous. It's that they look familiar. They speak in emotional frequencies you grew up hearing. If your love language was walking on eggshells, if affection came after compliance, if your worth was measured in silence, perfection, or sacrifice, then chaos will feel like chemistry. Manipulation will feel like attention, and abuse will feel like home. They don't need to attack you. They just need to feel like someone you've already loved, and that's how the trap is set. You see, emotional predators don't always come cloaked in cruelty. Some arrive with soft voices, warm eyes, and tragic stories. They bleed vulnerability. They ask for your empathy, and then feed on it. The power of projection. Why you fall for their potential. Here's what makes it more dangerous. You're not seeing them. You're seeing the parts of yourself you buried long ago. You project your kindness onto them, your loyalty, your empathy. You imagine they must feel as deeply as you do, because it would hurt too much to believe otherwise. So you craft a narrative around their chaos. They're just wounded. They didn't mean it. They've never felt safe before. And now, it's your job to save them, to show them what love could be. You've mistaken trauma bonding for soul bonding. But Jung would remind you, this is not individuation. This is enmeshment. When you carry the savior complex, you forget. Some people drown because they pull others under. The mask they wear. Empathy as a weapon. This first face, the familiar stranger, often wears a mask that looks like empathy. They know exactly what to say, exactly when to say it. They mirror your values, your dreams, your fears. But this isn't connection, it's imitation. They study you, they memorize your emotional blueprints, and then they perform them back at you like a psychic mimic. Their stories are strategically broken, not too broken to scare you away, just enough to awaken your urge to heal. They will cry, they will confess, they will self-blame. But none of it is transformation. It's camouflage. They don't want to be healed. They want to be excused. Emotional predators are not always narcissists. Let's make something clear. This isn't always about textbook narcissists or sociopaths. The human psyche is more subtle than that. Some emotional predators are deeply unaware of the harm they cause. They are unconscious manipulators, living through trauma cycles passed down for generations. They love, but their love is corrupted. They connect, but their connection is conditional. They need, but their need devours. Their presence overwhelms you, but it's not loud, it's heavy. Their chaos seeps into your nervous system. And suddenly, you become the emotional regulator of the relationship. You absorb their pain. You rationalize their silence. You apologize for their rage, and all the while, you call it love. Why you don't leave right away? Here's the hardest part. You don't leave these people quickly, because the familiar stranger makes you feel chosen, not just by them, but by life itself. You think, there must be a reason we met. And in a way, you're right. They're not a mistake. They're a mirror. A mirror for every part of you still unhealed. A lesson in boundaries, in discernment, in self-trust. But you won't learn the lesson until the illusion breaks, until the mask slips, until the pedestal crumbles. You'll only wake up when the version of them you built begins to fall apart. And the person underneath, the one who never truly existed, starts to emerge. The psychology behind it, Jung's lens. Jungian psychology teaches us that what we repress becomes our shadow. But shadows don't just sit quietly. They act, they project, they attract. When you are unaware of your own emotional patterns, your shadow becomes your picker. You don't choose who you love. Your pain does. You attract the people who echo your early emotional environment. Not because you're broken, but because you're trying to resolve something. The predator appears as a second chance to fix what your childhood couldn't, to rescue the parent who never changed, to be the love you never received. But healing doesn't come from repetition. It comes from recognition. You must learn to see the difference between an emotional bond and an emotional trap, between spiritual resonance and psychological reenactment. Only then can the spell be broken. The awakening, when the illusion fades. One day, something changes. Their words stop sounding profound. Their chaos stops feeling exciting. Their neediness starts to drain you. And in the quiet of your exhaustion, a voice inside whispers, "This is not love. This is survival." And survival isn't sacred. You don't owe your healing to someone who won't face their own. You don't owe your loyalty to someone who manipulates your kindness. The familiar stranger was never home. They were a test, a sacred interruption, a symbolic messenger asking one question. Will you betray yourself again, or will you finally choose peace? This is the first face, the most seductive, the most deceptive. Not because they lie to you, but because they make you lie to yourself. Remember this, predators aren't always predators. They're people carrying unresolved grief. But just because you understand them, doesn't mean you should stay. Let them go, even if it hurts, even if it feels cruel, because the longer you stay, the more you abandon the self you were always meant to become, and your evolution deserves protection. They walk into the room as if the light was already waiting for them. You feel it instantly, a strange gravity, but not the kind that makes you feel safe. It's a gravity that distorts. It bends you inward, like you're slowly shrinking in their presence. Yet you don't know why. They speak in polished tones. They laugh at the right moments. They compliment you. Not too much, not too little. They seem warm, engaging, effortlessly confident. For a moment, you believe, this is someone who truly sees you. But in reality, they've only seen your outline, and they're already painting inside it. With their colors, not yours. This is the face of the predator that mimics approval, only to feed off your need for it. This is the narcissist. Not just a label, but a psychic archetype Carl Jung warned us about. A fragmented self, hiding behind a flawless persona, searching for mirrors, not relationships. And if you've ever fallen into their orbit, you know exactly how they pull you in. The aura of magnetism, but it's not what you think. It begins with fascination. You feel drawn to them like a moth to the flame. But what you are actually sensing isn't warmth. It's the hunger beneath the charm. You don't realize it at first, because your intuition has been disarmed. They disarm it by making you feel seen, not deeply, but selectively. They reflect back to you your own light, but only so they can use it. They're not curious about your soul. They're collecting it, admiring it like a trophy behind glass, not because they respect it, but because it adds to their illusion of grandeur. Their aura feels expansive, like it fills the room. But that's only because they've learned how to absorb everyone else's energy and leave none for you. They've mistaken admiration for love. And if you stay too long, so will you. Jung's warning: the mask is a prison. Carl Jung called this phenomenon the persona, the social mask we all wear to survive in society. But when someone becomes addicted to their persona, they forget who they are underneath. And the narcissist? They didn't just forget. They exiled their real self. Long ago, they were a child who learned that approval was conditional. They learned that vulnerability was dangerous, that being themselves wasn't enough. So they built a beautiful mask, and then forgot it was a mask. Now, they survive through performance, through manipulation, through control of perception. And when you enter their world, they'll begin to sculpt your image too, so you fit into the performance. At first, it feels like intimacy, but slowly, it becomes a stage play where you are only cast in the role of admirer. Nothing more. You don't realize when it begins. But suddenly you find yourself working harder to keep their attention. They'll praise you just enough to keep you chasing. Withdraw just enough to keep you guessing. Create small emotional debts you feel the need to repay. They become the sun, and you orbit them, even as your own light starts to flicker. Why? Because they trigger a deeper wound inside you. The belief that being needed is the same as being loved. Jung believed our unconscious attracts what we haven't healed. And when the narcissist shows up, they reflect your forgotten hunger to finally feel chosen. But it's a lie. They don't choose you. They choose your energy, your reflection, your admiration. And when you run out of both, they will leave, as if you were never real. The most dangerous weapon the narcissist wields isn't cruelty. It's confusion. They'll contradict themselves, then deny it. They'll hurt you subtly, then say you're too sensitive. They'll lie without blinking, then accuse you of distrust. Over time, your inner compass begins to tremble. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess your memories. You feel like you're unraveling. But what's really happening is this. They are projecting their inner chaos into you. Their self-hatred, their shame, their fear of insignificance. And now, you are carrying what they refuse to face. You're drowning in a fog that was never yours. This is no longer a relationship. It's a possession. Have you ever left a conversation with someone and felt exhausted, empty, like something invisible was taken from you? That's not a coincidence. It's energetic theft. Narcissists are psychic vampires. They survive by feeding on the emotional responses of others. Your awe, your jealousy, your admiration, your pain. It all nourishes them, and it's never enough. The more you give, the hungrier they become. But here's the truth. You're not broken because you fell for them. You're human. You craved connection. They just knew how to counterfeit it. The real danger isn't them. It's staying in denial once you see them. So how do you escape their grip? Not by fighting them. Not by proving your worth. Not by trying to fix them. You heal by remembering your original shape. The version of you that didn't shrink to be loved. The voice in you that whispers, something feels wrong. Even when the world says, they're amazing. You begin by reclaiming your boundaries. By sitting in the discomfort of not being liked. By choosing solitude over soul drain. And most of all, by looking into your own shadow. Because part of why they found you was because a piece of you was still searching for someone to validate your worth. When you begin to validate yourself, their spell breaks, their power fades, their aura dissolves, and you finally realize they were never powerful. You just forgot yours. In the end, the narcissist wasn't a mistake. They were a mirror dash, not of who you are, but of who you're not meant to be. They showed you the cost of abandoning your authenticity. They taught you the ache of being unseen. And in their betrayal, you began to see yourself more clearly. And that clarity, that's where your real aura begins. Not the mask, not the performance, but the raw, sovereign light that doesn't beg to be seen. Because it sees itself, and no predator, no matter how seductive, can survive in the presence of someone who has finally come home to themselves. You didn't realize it at first, but they knew exactly where your armor was thin. They watched how you flinched when someone ignored you, how your voice softened when you talked about family, how your eyes dropped when they tested your limits. Just slightly. You thought you were building rapport, but they were mapping out a strategy. Your silence was their invitation. Your empathy, a roadmap. Because emotional predators don't break in. They mirror the part of you that still wants to be understood. And then, they become the thing you long to trust. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That's how they feed. By lurking in the blind spots of your psyche. You've met them before. Not in appearance, but in energy. They show up as someone who gets you, who finishes your sentences, who senses your needs before you speak, and it feels divine. You mistake it for connection. But it's imitation. They are mirroring the parts of yourself that you haven't yet fully claimed. The part that craves acceptance. The part that still confuses intensity with intimacy. The part that says, finally, someone sees me. But they don't. They see your hunger. They echo it back to you. And by the time you realize the mirror is two-way glass, you're already giving them power. In Jungian terms, boundaries are psychic membranes. They protect the self from being swallowed by projections, yours and theirs. But when you grow up in environments where your needs were ignored, where guilt was used to control you, where love was a performance, you learn to shapeshift. You learn to please. You learn to lower the drawbridge even when the invaders smile. You internalize a dangerous idea that love means sacrifice, that to be seen, you must give yourself away. Predators smell this from a mile away. To them, your guilt is a scent trail. Your kindness is a weakness to exploit. They start by becoming a version of you. If you're spiritual, they quote sacred texts. If you're trauma-informed, they name-drop psychologists. If you're self-aware, they pretend to be introspective. But none of it is real. It's a performance, a simulation of your inner world. They become what your inner child would attach to. Because once you feel seen, you'll stop questioning. You'll let them in. And the moment you do, they begin to twist the bond. The same empathy that once felt sacred now becomes leverage. They guilt you for creating space. They punish you for needing autonomy. They act hurt when you draw a line, because to them, your boundaries are insults. Your resistance is betrayal. They believe they're entitled to your energy because they mirrored you to earn it. Here's the truth. They're not just feeding off your attention. They're feeding off your psychic confusion. They thrive when you're unsure, when you question your gut, when you start explaining yourself, when you feel bad for protecting your peace. They twist your empathy against you. They speak your love language to keep you close, while violating your soul in silence. It's not always rage or overt manipulation. Sometimes it's subtle sabotage, passive withdrawal, a glance that makes you feel small, a phrase like, "I guess I just care more than you do." These aren't just tactics, they're hooks. Hooks that dig into your nervous system and feed on your uncertainty. Jung said that what remains unconscious in us will rule us from the shadows. Predators know this. They don't attack your strength. They imitate your innocence. They don't overpower you. They get you to lower the gates, and they do it through the language of closeness. You think they're giving you attention, but really they're watching your response. Every smile, every wince, every hesitation is a clue. They don't just study your behavior. They download your emotional code. Because the ultimate power isn't to control someone. It's to get them to control themselves on your behalf. And that's what you do. You censor your intuition. You silence your gut. You manage their moods. You shrink so they don't explode. And you tell yourself, they're not that bad. What makes emotional predators dangerous isn't just the harm they cause. It's the way they teach you to betray yourself in order to stay. You stop trusting your anger. You numb your instincts. You doubt your worth. And by the time you wake up, you're not even sure who you are anymore. Jung said the goal of life is individuation, becoming the self, whole and undivided. But you can't individuate while you're emotionally entangled with someone who is draining your psychic energy. Your aura becomes clouded. Your dreams become distorted. Your choices feel foreign because the predator hasn't just taken your energy. They've rewritten your perception of reality. But here's the turning point. When the mirror begins to crack, you stop seeing them and start seeing you. You begin to notice how your need to be understood kept you blind. You realize the red flags weren't subtle. You just painted them white. You see how your boundaries were always whispering, "This doesn't feel right," but you overrode them to preserve the illusion. This is not weakness, this is awakening. Because once you reclaim your inner authority, the mirror shatters. They can't imitate you anymore, because you no longer need a reflection to feel real. The most terrifying thing to a predator is not confrontation. It's disinterest. When you stop reacting, they lose control. When you stop explaining, they lose access. When you walk away, they face the void they tried to fill through you. And you. You begin to remember who you were before the distortion, before the mimicry, before you let someone else narrate your story. You're not cold, you're clear. You're not distant, you're protected. You're not bitter, you're boundaried. As you step back into yourself, something remarkable happens. You no longer attract the same mirrors, because your aura no longer seeks what hurt you. Your frequency changes. Your standards rise. Your intuition sharpens. You stop needing to be needed. You stop begging to be seen. Because now you see yourself, and the mirror no longer dictates your worth. You become the seer, not the reflection. This is individuation. This is power, and no predator can feed on someone who's no longer starving for validation. They hijack your story and cast you as the villain. There's a kind of violence that leaves no bruises, a subtle hijacking of your story, where you become the villain, not because of what you did, but because someone needed you to be. This is the fourth face of emotional predation, the narrative manipulator, the person who uses perception as a prison. And it begins with projection. Carl Jung described projection as an act of disowning. When someone cannot face their own shame, anger, or weakness, they cast it onto you, like a psychic curse. They no longer see you. They see what they fear in themselves, and so they fight you, not as you are, but as the enemy they've imagined. Their accusations seem sudden, their cruelty baseless. But in their inner world, you've already been tried and sentenced. The narcissist begins with fascination. They ask questions, mirror your values, applaud your depth. But they are collecting data, not to understand you, but to recast you. Soon they flip the script. You become unstable, selfish, disloyal. They become the misunderstood hero. This inversion protects their brittle ego. Anyone who sees too clearly becomes a threat, so they strike first. And they're convincing enough that others often believe them. This is how truth gets buried, how families fracture, how you begin to doubt your own memories. They don't just lie. They rewrite the script in real time. They twist your words, minimize your pain, accuse you of overreacting. And slowly, you begin to question yourself. You stop trusting your emotions. You doubt your perception. This is when your inner story, your reality, begins to fracture. Jung warned, the worst trauma isn't what happens to us, but when our truth is replaced by someone else's fantasy. Why you? Because your presence reminded them of everything they buried. Your light triggers their shadow. Your authenticity threatens their illusion. So instead of growing, They twist you. Not because you're wrong, but because their ego can't survive what you represent. You don't win by arguing. You don't reclaim your name through their eyes. You simply say, I reject this role. This script was never mine. And then you walk away. Jung said, healing begins when we accept who we truly are, not the version someone else cast us to be. The hijacker wants you to play the fool, but Jung would ask, what deeper archetype is emerging in you? The seeker, the warrior, the healer. Once you embrace your true role, you stop needing to be understood. You simply become. And that presence, quiet, grounded, sovereign, is your return. The hijacker fears one thing more than exposure: abandonment. Because when you walk away, you take the mirror with you. And without that reflection, their fantasy collapses. So they may rage, plead, smear, manipulate, but that's no longer your concern. You were never the villain. You were simply miscast. And now, the curtain falls. Some people need you to be the enemy, because they're at war with themselves. But your soul wasn't meant to play a part in someone else's script. It was meant to write its own. So reclaim your voice, your name, your story. You are not who they said you were. You are who you were always becoming. Once you walked away, they didn't love you. They loved how they felt around you. You were their mirror, their muse, their light source. And when you stopped giving, you became too much, too sensitive, too distant. The illusion of connection? They arrived gently, magnetic, attentive, even healing. You felt seen, maybe even chosen. But it wasn't you they saw. It was your energy, your insight, your light. They didn't want to evolve. They wanted to feed. They never screamed. They smirked. They joked at your expense, mocked your intuition, rolled their eyes at your sensitivity, and slowly, you began to dim yourself, to shrink your truth, to manage their moods. You didn't realize you were becoming the caretaker of someone else's disowned soul. Jung said, people will do anything to avoid facing their own soul. These people, they don't just avoid it. They outsource it to you. They suppress their shadow, then hijack your aura to feel whole. You become their filter, their fixer, their reflection. And when you need space, you're labeled difficult. After every interaction, you feel it. Tired, foggy, doubting yourself. That's not random. It's psychic drain. You're not crazy. You're being siphoned. Jung would call this emotional enmeshment with an unintegrated shadow, and it always ends the same. They drain you, then blame you, then call you selfish for walking away. You were never too much. You were clear. But clarity is their enemy. It threatens the illusion. They feed on confusion, because that's what they live in. Your light was never the problem. The right people don't dim you. They defend your light. They don't need you to shrink to feel safe. They meet you at eye level, not under their thumb. So let them call you difficult. Because what they're really saying is, you stopped letting me feed on your energy. And that's not difficult. That's sacred. You were never the problem. You were just no longer available to be used. And in a world full of shadows, your light will always be misunderstood by those who've lost their own. But don't dim, don't shrink, don't apologize. You are not too much. You are finally enough. for yourself.